Mr Dickens, read by Duncan Jefferson. A brief extract. Davy shuffled over to the two of them, still completely confused as to how he'd gotten here. He picked up a crust of bread and what seemed to be the roasted leg of a chicken. It tasted delicious. "It's from the old red cow in Smithfield," Dodger answered the unspoken question on Davy's greased lips. "Old Dick O'Shea, he cooks the best hen this side of old Mother Thames." "If Dick knew you'd lifted it, Dodger, he might not look too kindly on you the next time he sees you, my dear," Fagin said, placing his hand proudly on his young accomplice's shoulder. "Is this where you live?" asked Davy. "It's very humble, but it's all we could find under the present circumstances," replied Fagin. "Yet within these damp and dreary walls you'll find many boys like you. Lost boys, betrayed boys, abandoned boys, beaten boys, and it pains me to say some very damaged boys too." There was a palpable pain in Fagin's voice as he spoke. "They had nowhere to go, so I took them in. I tried to help where I can, and I teach them some little tricks to help them get by," he continued. "Simple little tricks that help them keep them alive and out of more trouble." "I ain't so sure about the extra bit of trouble, Fagin," Dodger interjected. "That's only because we can run faster than them peelers." He picked up a chicken wing, examined it closely before putting it all in his mouth and crunching on the bones. "Finish your food and then Dodger here will show you around, won't you, Dodger?" "What do you think I am, Fagin, a bleeding wet nurse or something?" There, my dear," Fagin clucked. "Young Davy needs to know where things are and who he can trust, eh?" Fagin soothed his fractious lad. After Davy had finished eating, Dodger showed him around the abandoned warehouse before heading out to the cluttered nearby streets. Dodger ambled through the streets as if he owned the place, hands deep inside his pocket and his hat jauntily perched on one side of his tousled head. Despite his pinched looks, Dodger had a kind face, a face that had yet to sprout the first few whiskers of manhood. Pulling a clay pipe with a stumpy stem from his pocket, he poked it in the direction of some market stalls. "That's a great place to eat when it gets busy. No one misses an apple if it happens to fall into your pocket, if you gets me drift." He glanced sideways at Davy, who obviously didn't get any drift at all. "If an apple was to accidentally get knocked off and land in the mud, then yous is doing the right thing by picking it up before anyone slips on it. Of course, it wouldn't be right to put it in your pocket if it was dirty, so you has to clean it, and then it's only natural to eat it. No one's going to eat it after a vagabond like you and me has handled it." The devastating logic of it eventually pierced the fog that was still clearing inside of Davy's brain. "But that's stealing." The shock of the idea was writ large on his young face. "Don't get your knickers in a twist, Davy. There ain't no one else what's going to give you an apple, and I don't suppose you has a coin in your pocket to pay for any, so what's a lad to do?" A memory appeared inside Davy's head. He remembered one night when he couldn't sleep and he'd crept downstairs to ask his pa if he could read late. His parents were on the sofa watching a TV programme on refugees. It was somewhere in Africa, and he seemed to remember that there had been a really bad drought. No rain, no crops, no food. Like there were no malls there either, or anywhere to buy food, even if the poor people had any money. He remembered the helicopters dropping crates of food and seeing the crowds descend on them like the poor famished souls they were. Now he began to understand why he'd been disturbed by what he saw. Now he was beginning to understand that sometimes if you have nothing, you get nothing, and that if there's no one to help you, then you can starve, unless... "Do you steal things, Dodger?" he asked, looking at his companion. "Well, there ain't no one here what's going to give it to you, Davy." The sound of his name from Dodger's lips reassured the boy. For the first time since he'd been in this dream time, he thought that perhaps he might not be alone after all. Suddenly, Dodger grabbed him by the sleeve and pulled him behind a fish stall. For a moment he found himself staring into the glassy-eyed skeletons of several fish. "See that geezer over there?" his companion asked, pointing to the far side of the street. Davy scanned the crowds until his eyes settled on a tall, lean man, sporting a full beard and dark eyes like a raven. He wore a black frock coat and dapper check trousers held tight at the ankles by canvas spats to fend off the mud and the detritus of the streets of London. Davy nodded his head silently in affirmation. "Watch out for him, me lad. He's very dangerous." As he spoke the words, Dodger stood stock still, willing himself to become invisible. The man on the far side of the street stopped mid-stride and looked suddenly in their direction. Davy ducked down behind the stall, imagining that he could actually feel the man's eyes scouring the scene and seeking them out. He held his breath. "He's gone," Dodger whispered, stepping out into the mired street. "Who was that man?" Davy asked. "And why is he so dangerous? Is he a murderer or something?" "Worse than that," Dodger said, looking around the street to make sure they were truly safe. "Murderers just kill you. That man sucks the soul out of you and then mocks you just 'cause you're different. It's like a living death," he muttered darkly. "What's he called? Is he a wizard or something?" Dodger let out a laugh and his shoulders relaxed. "No, me old son," he said, putting his arm around his companion. "That geezer's name is Dickens. Mr Charles Dickens."